Welcome to Roll of a Dice, a Game Master's Guide for better role-playing. I'm Dan.
And I'm Lee, the resident GM of the podcast.
And in this episode, we are talking to Pete Watson-Wailes, the creator of the game Triumvene. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey there, thanks very much for having me on.
Now, we saw that you had a Kickstarter going on. You know, honestly, we tried to get you on a while back with some unforeseen things, or maybe foreseen. But now we have you on now. So just to give us a little quick background, would you mind talking about the Kickstarter that you had?
Yeah, for sure. So the game came out of me having a very long commute of around 5 hours a day. And I thought, well, I've got to do something to kill the time. So I've been playing RPGs for a very long time. And I thought, well, it's about time that I write one. About that same time, I'd been writing a book and it had a kind of an interesting world, but the plot fell apart about halfway through. So I thought, well, why not take the world building that we've done for this, put it together as the background for a game, work with some friends on a rule system, and then package that all up. And there was no kind of real aim at that time to turn it into a commercial product, but it was just kind of something for us to all hack around with on a Wednesday night. But after a while, some friends said, this is quite cool. You should probably think about Kickstarter. I was like, I've got some time coming up. I can do that. There's nothing big coming along, like the birth of my first child or anything like that. So we decided, solve all the problems at the same time. And in June we put the Kickstarter live, and my son was born. So it's just been chaos, basically. But we kickstarted pretty successfully. We raised, I think, about £15,000. It's $20,000, something like that. So that was kind of cool. We sent out the PDF the couple of weeks ago, and we're just about to send the print out to all be printed. So we'll be getting an enormous pile of books coming back and then sending those out all around the world. So
that's exciting.
Yeah, that's kind of that in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's pretty cool. So yeah, congrats on the Kickstarter.
Thank you.
You mentioned that you wrote a book, but then went into making it into an RPG. So you didn't play this world before at all. You were just creating the world in a book, and then decided to kind of run it with some people.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the book and the game share a similar theme in that I've been a geeky nerd since forever, and I grew up reading all the usual suspects of Eddings and Tolkien and all that kind of stuff. And then I kind of got to a point where I was like, I'm reading a lot of fantasy books, and they're all tropey to an extent. And then I discovered Max Gladstone's craft sequence, if anyone listening knows them, which are kind of modern day law and finance reimagined as a way of working magic. And I was kind of fascinated by this concept. And I thought that, this is kind of really interesting. It's fantasy there's lots of tension going on and lots of really kind of interesting story building and world building, but almost entirely the combat's been removed. The combat that exists is happening through sort of courtroom law drama almost. And I thought that was a really fascinating concept. And I thought, well, I've had 20 years worth of playing, D&D and Pathfinder and Dark Heresy and all sorts of different things over the years. And we just kind of myself and a group of friends who play, we were like, we've had a very long time of playing stuff where eventually at some point the story gives way to devolving into going and poking things with pointy sticks. And we thought there's got to be more that we can do with this. Like, there's a reason that the FPS genre exists and that so many RPGs are built around combat is because it's a really easy way to create dopamine going on in people's brains, right? Mm-hmm. It's a really easy way to create narrative tension. Give someone a dopamine spike and they get excited, and you get the anticipation of what's going on and the nervousness around, will our characters survive? And then, yay, we do, or oh no, there was a TPK, right? Let's roll some new characters and start again. Mm-hmm. But I was like, this feels lazy. This feels like it's, like there is one way that we've kind of come to depend on as to how we create narrative tension. And at the same time, I was watching a lot of Critical Role, and I thought, actually, the best bits of this are when they're not fighting monsters. It's when Grog is desperately trying to interact with people, from high society, and go, everyone is kind of saying, good day, and it's like, oh, good day, and that puts a smile on everyone's face, or the in the final bits of the last campaign when they're going towards the monster, and it's, you know, Pike being told by Grog, you know, you're a monster, and Pike goes, I'm a monster. It's also a monster.
I really think you hit on something that we've been talking about through our podcast is, yes, it's awesome to kick ass and take names and get the prize, but you get such more rewarding experience when you are now talking as your character to your friend who's another character, and you have a connection of some kind, a realization, a dramatic moment together, and that'll stick with you, I think, even forever, instead of just saying, oh, I remember that one time I rolled the 20-sided die and I killed that guy. That was cool.
Yeah, and you know, you do get some awesome moments like that. You know, when they're, you know, staying with Critical Role, there's a thing when Grog's fighting, I think his name's Kovac, and it's, you know, he rolls for the final blow, rolls a natural 20, comes out of a bag of holding, flies down and cleaves the guy in two, and it's like, on the one hand, this is made awesome by the fact that, you know, it's a nat 20 roll, and it's a moment of awesome, and Matt DMs it brilliantly. And that, you know, that's a great moment to combat. But I find certainly in the games that I play and in that I GM, the social side, like, that tends to be the thing that people refer back to more. And I think there's a kind of reasonably obvious reason for that, which is that in our day-to-day lives, not many of us are going out and slaying orcs, whereas, you know, everyone's been down the pub and had that moment where someone just cracks a joke at a perfect time and it just leaves you rolling. You know, howling with laughter for the next 5 minutes, or, you know, that thing where you've been out in the woods and, you know, you've all had one too many to drink and someone falls into a bit of a hole and you sit there and you're laughing at someone else's pain and it's hilarious. You know, there's a truth to that. And so the idea for this game kind of started out as, what if, you know, big things are going to happen in the world and you're the people who are going to solve the world's problems, not because you're, you know, the chosen ones or you've got some great powers or anything, but just you're the local, you're a marketer and a lawyer and an accountant and somebody who wanted to be a judge but didn't quite manage to make it, and they've parlayed their skills into a life of a successful entrepreneur and farmer. And you are kind of ending up saving the world. And a large part of this was inspired by a wonderful scene from Stargate SG-1 where the Asgard turn up and they're like, okay, well, we're picking Jack O'Neill to negotiate on behalf of humanity for the fate of mankind. And they're like, and he's like, you know, there's other people who might be better suited than me to this particular challenge.
Daniel Jackson right here. Look at him.
Yeah, look, he speaks lots of languages.
And I'm Jack O'Neill.
And wise man.
I'm Jack O'Neill with 2 L's.
We have met you and we trust you, and we've met no one else and trust no one else, so you're it. And I'm like, what if that was the situation? Like, you have no you have no qualification. There is nothing that means that you are the right people for this job, other than the people who have the say to say, you're the people who are going to do this, say, you're the people who are going to do this. And now you have to make the best of it.
You're the hobbits of the story being thrust into,
like, you know,
to be the heroes.
You are being Frodo'd into this.
Correct. And
like, you're not heroic. In fact, you're more than that. You're being Samwised into this. Like, Frodo at least wanted to go on an adventure. Sam is like, you know, I just want to grow some garlic.
And I like that pretty girl over there.
Is going on this adventure, so I guess, like, I should probably have his back because Gandalf told me to, and he's really scary.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And
please don't turn me into something unnatural. Yes. That is why you are going, because you're scared of the guy with the big stick and beard.
Well, I think we've established your geeky nerdiness, as you've put it.
Oh, yeah.
And, we definitely want to talk about Triumvene, but maybe could you tell us how you got into role-playing and maybe what some of your favorite games were?
Yeah. Oh, God. So I got into it through a kind of back alley. I started playing Warhammer 40K. Back in I would say my teen years, but I hadn't actually hit my teen years yet. I think it was about 11 or 12. And from that kind of opened this world to me of communal wargaming, communal story gaming, because we started kind of creating this mythos around the 40K games that we play of, you know, what's happening to these characters around this time. And, because I used to play, the XCOM games back in the day. And so we started creating stories for the soldiers. Like, this soldier is, this model is a specific person, and he just keeps getting pulled into these really horrible situations. And like, what is it that makes him be the person that's turning up there? Okay, well, we decide his CO hates him. We're like, okay, why does his CO hate him? And we kind of turned 40k into a bit of an RPG, where occasionally we'd then descend into just going and rinsing a bunch of Space Marines against some Eldar or some Orcs or some Chaos or whatever it was. And so we kind of accidentally started role playing this, and we had a physics teacher who kind of encouraged this, and that was 20 something odd years ago now.
You had a teacher that encouraged you to create that, or to game?
To both. He kind of ran the local model making, I mean, not society, but kind of group. He was our physics teacher. And so he'd make terrain and was good at model painting and all this kind of stuff. And so this, when we kind of realized that there's sort of 5 or 6 of us who like this, and the teacher liked this, it sort of grew and grew and grew. And so from that, it then kind of became a thing of looking around and going, well, there must be other stuff that exists that's like this. And then we got into D&D back in, I can't even remember, probably 2nd edition at that point, maybe.
I think we're around the same age, so yeah, it seems to be around that time. It was 2nd edition, advanced D&D.
Yeah. So that was the entry point. And I always, like, I liked it, but I always kind of felt this feels, even back then when I liked this kind of stuff, I was like, this feels a bit tropey. I'd never kind of had myself down as the heroic character sort of person. So I started DMing, and that kind of fell into that thing for me. And then I could kind of guide the story in a way that felt a bit more interesting to me. Because I've always lived more for the character moments than the combat stuff. But at that point, it was very much, hack and slash, and we're clearing dungeons, and, we're slaying kobolds and all that kind of good stuff. And then from there, over the years, I progressed into playing all sorts of stuff. I mean, lots and lots and lots of D&D. And then Pathfinder when that came around. And then we kind of, over the past sort of 5 or 6 years, played quite a lot of things like Numenera, where you get that kind of twist and a slightly sort of weirded version of something. And then more recently, I picked up probably about six months ago, Legacy: Life Among the Ruins, which is a PBTA game. And I quite like a lot of the kind of narrative focused stuff that you get with a lot of that kind of bent of games. So the Blades in the Dark, Powered by the Apocalypse, Dungeon World, all those sorts of things. The sort of fiction first stuff. And that's kind of my jam at the minute when I'm not running Triumvene.
So when you were looking to create or write this book, the world for it, or system, how did you delve into and say, okay, I need to create this into a story-driven system? What did you focus on to keep that?
Yeah, so I wanted to run essentially the story that I'd started writing for the book, because I thought like the outline of the plot was pretty solid. But I wanted to give it more as like a framework of, these are things that are going to happen in the world, almost regardless of what you do. And then how you respond to the events that happen is where the meat lies. There was a strong thing. I grew up reading a lot of stuff by Ian M. Banks. And one of the things that's always stuck with me is with Consider Phlebas, the idea that you've got this war that's going on, and you've got this group of people going off and doing this, heroic last stand and action against this villainous enemy. And the idea that actually, whether or not they win or lose, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really affect anything. It doesn't change anything. The world is going to happen around you, whether or not you want to kind of engage with that. And there's a certain amount that you can influence it. But just some things are going to happen, and that's, for positive and for negative. People have often questioned the idea of, what would happen if Franz Ferdinand wasn't shot? Would you then still get the rise of World War I? Or if the Wright brothers hadn't invented powered flight, somebody else would have still done it around the same time. Some things are just inevitable and they're going to happen. And so I wanted to kind of set up this tension of that. On the one hand, you've got this main kind of 3-act play almost, where there are certain scenes that are defined that are going to happen irrespective of what the players do. The world is going to force these things to happen. But at the same time, you've then got this enormous bank of event seeds that go along with the game these are totally open-ended. And it's just, here's a thing that's happening. Whatever happens with the players, that's then what happens in the world. So you've got this tension between the events that you can control, the events that you can't control, the events that you can influence to a certain extent. Something like the Mass Effect games, where you can have 10 different playthroughs and have 10 different experiences every time, but you're still essentially playing through the same beats of the same story. What makes it unique is how you choose to respond to those certain situations, not that you're going to go to Navaria and you're going to go to wherever, and those events and what unfolds there will always happen. That doesn't mean that you can't still have an experience in your group that's personal and that's unique to you.
Do you ever have players think that they can't influence the world enough?
Yes, I mean, obviously this kind of leads into questions around railroading and to what extent you're kind of forcing them down certain paths. My argument has always been that there's a difference between the things that you can't control and things that you can't influence. Like when you're a kid, everybody goes to school, right? You're all going to have to do that. But different people's experience of school is vastly different. Some people, they're the jock or they're the nerd, or my friends at school who were part of doing all the kind of drama thing and music thing were very different to the people who were on sports teams. And you've got the cool kids and the kids who are kind of very academic, or the ones who are really artistic, and you're all in the same place, you're all in the same environment, you're all subject to certain things, but the way you interpret that, how that plays out for you, can be totally different. So although there's questions around to what extent do you have agency, and to what extent does the world have agency, I don't think that the idea that there's defined things that are going to happen at some point, that there are events that are going to happen, means that you can't influence the world. But we went to quite a lot of trouble in crafting the campaign to make it that the things that happen are things that are happening on a global scale, on a global stage outside of what you and your group are doing. So there is a limit to how much you can influence things. I have influence in my group of friends. I have influence in the marketing world thanks to my colleagues and people that I know from that side of things. But I can't influence, a royal wedding. That's going to occur whatever I do. Mm-hmm. Or I can vote in an election, but I can't force the candidate to be who I would like them to be. Yeah. So you have to, you've got an element of agency, and you've got agency in response to how you deal with the hand that you get dealt. But there are certain things that just happen, and you kind of have to accept it. And I've never held with this idea that the group should be able to do absolutely anything that they want without limit or consequence, because then you're sort of in a God simulation game, which, that can be cool, but that's a very different sort of an experience that you're then having compared to, here's something potentially terrible that's happened. Now go and deal with this. Or, here's one of the events is, okay, you wake up one morning and your group have just discovered that there's a baby at the end of the bed, and there's a note saying, please look after this. I for reasons can't take care of this child. By the way, they've got an accelerated rate of growth, so you've got about kind of 6 months, and then get on with it. And what do? You go, okay, we try and find the parents and hand them back, or okay, we try and find a school and educate them, or we send them to boarding school, or we decide, okay, you know what, we're now raising a child as a group for the next 6 months.
I'd be afraid of that baby because it's probably a Jem'Hadar baby, and you have to give it back to the founders.
Yeah, this is going to end badly in York because the Dominion are on their way.
They're on their way. They're coming no matter what. And so you did a lot. Not only are you creating this world, Triumvene, but you also create a system to help push those narratives in your story, in your games, in your world. Could you tell us about the Imperial system?
Yeah, so the Imperial system draws from It's an attempt on my part, and it's flawed, as I believe that every system is flawed in certain ways. You know, there's going to be things that it does well and things that it doesn't. In this case, it was an attempt to sit somewhere kind of midway between something like Fate and something like 5e. So it pushes the idea that narrative should be the main focus, that you have the ability to kind of decide, you know, we're going to go and do this thing and give you some options on how to do it, but limiting the tools that you have in your toolbox to do it. So something like D&D, if you decide you're going to play a wizard or some sort of a mage, then obviously you've got an enormous bank of spells that you can play with. In Triumvene, in the Imperial system, we decided, okay, let's really limit this. Let's make it that magic is an unfair thing, that not everyone has it, and if you have it, it means that probably something reasonably traumatic has happened to you at some point. Because, you know, it'd be more interesting if the world was populated by magical people the people who have these powers are the worst possible people you could pick to have them. What if everybody who's magical is more along the Voldemort end of the spectrum than the Dumbledore end? You know, Dumbledore obviously has, you know, his sister dies, and how much is that a motivator for why he becomes totally brilliant and powerful in that space? Voldemort obviously kind of takes the opposite end of the scale. You know, somebody who has an encounter with the idea of death and mortality and rockets so far away from that, he becomes the most powerful dark wizard of his age.
I like what you did with it. It's more about bending the laws of our reality and physics and limiting that with, if you do something wrong, you will be sucked into a black hole. You will, if obviously that's the far end of it.
Pretty much. Yeah.
The bad stuff.
And again, this idea that you've got consequence and responsibility.
Yes.
You know, that these are two things that are welded together. That you can have one, maybe two magical things that you can do. You know, maybe you've got the ability to manipulate someone's memory, or you can fiddle with time to an extent. Or we had somebody who they ended up with, through a bit of homebrewing, the ability to make rain. And like, that's the only thing that they can do, is that they can make rain. And it's like, okay, how do you use that usefully? You know, how do you turn that into a fascinating thing? We had somebody who they had the ability, it would take them basically about a minute to cast, and then they could jump back in time 5 seconds. And so whenever they were gambling, they would then cast it, watch what the outcome was, go back in time, and then fix it so that they always won. Because or you know, if they wanted to ask somebody a question during some sort of debate, or they wanted to see if someone was lying, they'd phrase a question one way, wind back the 5 seconds, phrase it another way, and see what changed.
And looking at the Imperial system, I see that you described it as in between Fate and 5th edition D&D, and it gives some love to the forgotten D12 die. Instead of instead of rolling a D20,
entirely D12 based, because it is the best of all the die. And also, my times table only goes up to 12. I don't know a 20 times table, and so, you know, that's obviously ridiculous and silly.
Oh, of course, you don't want to. No, that it's too much math, and you don't want to bother with that. Of course,
you know, I can count to 20. I've got, you know, 10 fingers and 10 toes, but you know, it's scary.
Yeah, you're going down a dark path.
Yeah. So I thought, you know, my D12 never gets used. So I'm like, you know what, D12s, they don't get enough love. We're building it around that. But it works. Yeah. So the system kind of pushes people down the kind of narrative route more than the kind of super crunch route, and tries to give people the space to kind of open things up a bit and say, okay, if you want to import like the flashback type thing from something like Blades, you can totally do that, and it won't kind of interfere. We're kind of giving it that this is a minimal framework with which you can run it, and that it fits nicely with the mechanical idea of that you've got responsibility wedded to choice and consequence. So one of the things that you can do, we've got this defiance mechanic where if you don't like how a dice roll has gone, you can decide, okay, I want to be able to roll it again, essentially giving yourself advantage. But every 3 times you do that, the GM gets the ability to just blanket make a roll fail at some point in the future. So, okay, you can do this. That's cool. But then there's potential issues with that down in the future. Same thing with manipulation magic, how that works. Same thing with the character creation and character generation. It's all kind of this tension of, you can do this, but
I was looking at the D12 and the target numbers you have, and I was like, wow, this is if you wanted to do something really difficult or impossible, it really is almost impossible. Is that
Yeah.
set up in a specific way just so you don't have people doing like godlike things all the time just from having a great roll, or
Yeah, basically, it's. I mean, one of the things that I've always had as an issue with D&D is the idea that you've got these people who have lived perfectly ordinary, normal lives within, one sigma of normal, up to a point, and then now in the next 6 months they're going from base human to god for no real apparent reason other than that the monsters get tougher and they've got to be able to keep up. And I get the mechanical reasons for that because it lets you fight more interesting things in a greater range of things, but it breaks the world in all sorts of weird ways. And